All right, let's talk about constructors in C++. So what are constructors? They are special member functions, and we'll talk about why they're special, that are automatically executed at the moment when an object is declared, right? And they're primarily used to initialize the object's member variables. Now, there are a couple of rules that they follow. We'll talk about them and then we'll take a look at an example. The first one is that they have exactly the same name as the class, right? The second is that they do not return any values or cannot return any values. And lastly, they are public. So let's take a look at an example. So here you have the class item, right? And here is its constructor. This particular constructor is a function declaration, a prototype. Now this one is taking three different arguments. The interesting things you note here that they have this even though this is a function, it has the same name as the class, right? And the second is that it does not specify any kind of return value. So there's not even a void listed here. This is how you declare a constructor, right? So after declaring the constructor, when you are creating objects, so in this case, you have identifier called my item of type item, and you declare it with in such fashion where you're passing in three values, it's going to invoke the matching constructor, right? In both of these cases, this constructor will be used to initialize values. So here's the declaration, but how do you define it? And there are two different ways to define uh, these constructors. There's a traditional way where you have an assignment body, and then there's an optimized initialization section way. So let's take a look at each one. This is the traditional way, right? Again, you have the specifier showing the class that this belongs to. This is the name of the constructor. And then this takes three arguments, right, that are used to initialize the member variables, right? Fairly standard. The second way is the method with an initialization section. So here you see this part here, there's a colon, right? Followed by each of the member variables with the arguments provided in parentheses. And this would means that name is initialized with S, price is initialized with P, and so on, right? So if if this is how it functions, then the question is, what do you do in the body, right? If it's already getting initialized this way, you can use the body for validity checks to make sure the things that are being passed in are not illegal, right? Now, just like with functions, you can have multiple constructors with different signatures, and these will be referred to naturally as overloaded constructor, right? Now, the term default constructor refers to a constructor that takes no arguments, right? So C++ will automatically generate an empty default constructor. That means it'll have nothing in the body for you, uh, only if you haven't defined any other constructors, right? Now, if you define any other custom constructor, you may want to manually create a default constructor if you still want to use one. So let's take a look at an example of overloaded constructors. So here, class item has three different constructors. The one that takes three arguments, one that takes one argument, and one that takes no argument. This is an explicit default constructor, right? It takes no arguments, right? So now, in when we're using them in declarations, if you have uh, these three variables, depending on how many arguments you're passing in, it will use the corresponding constructor. So here, it will use the first one. The second one here will use the 1R constructor. And the last one, where you're not passing anything in, will use the default constructor, right? Now, one thing you have to be careful about is when you are, in this one, please be careful not to use parentheses, because what the compiler would think is that this is a function prototype definition and uh, not a declaration, right? Now, you can assign default values directly in the class definition, right? And or you can use a constructor to delegate this work to. Um, uh, so let's take a look at what this means. So you can, for example, if you have a member variables, you can initialize them right here to give them default values, right? Or you can declare a constructor uh, which delegates initializing to another constructor. Here, we're saying, hey, this is the default constructor that no argument, uh, and it will call the 3-arg constructor and pass in some default values. And this is called constructor delegation. Okay. Now, just like we have constructors, we also have destructors, and we won't really talk about them much here because we will go through them in more detail. Now, a destructor is also a special function, and it's a special cleanup routine that is automatically triggered when an object goes out of scope, right? And it also has the same name as the class, but it has a little tilde in front of it, right? And you typically use it to clean up dynamic allocation and close files and stuff we haven't quite learned about yet, but I am just introducing this concept here, right? Every class has a destructor, right? If you don't define one, the compiler will automatically generate a default one for you, right? And they're called automatically when an object goes out of scope, right? There are situations where you need to create your own special destructors. That'll be covered more in later lessons when we talk about dynamic allocations and dynamic memory.